trusted voice of truth and light.
God gave me a gift. I shovel well. I shovel very well.
And a rally point for those who've accepted the reality that they are not sheep.
We've got a blind date with destiny.
And it looks like she's ordered the lobster.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there, and welcome to the show. You know, today I'm going to do my very best to justify my existence. Actually, not just my existence, but the existence of every single person out there, no matter how big the platform from which they're speaking or writing. We need free speech more than ever. I'm going to illustrate why here in just a few moments. Let me start by thanking the sponsors who make this program possible, including Dixie Chiropractic, HSLAmmo.com, sewingandquiltingcenter.com, MonticelloCollege.org, LifesavingFood.com, the Heather Turner team at Patriot Home Mortgage, and also GovernYourCrypto.com. So I know the big trending news is, what's this? Elon Musk is buying Twitter, or has made an offer to buy Twitter. And, you know, I'm not that big on spending all my time on social media. In fact, I really limit how much time I spend on social media, thanks to having watched a show called The Social Dilemma. And by the way, if you haven't seen it, it's worth your time, if only just to introduce the possibility. What if the place where so many people spend so much time just scrolling, sending out emojis and messages and whatnot, was being used to manipulate how you see the world? I think they make a pretty strong case, and I'm skeptical of what social media provides in terms of costs versus benefits. In some cases, I think the costs may outweigh the benefits, but let's look at what is happening with Elon Musk saying, hey, he bought, like a 9, almost 10% share of Twitter. And he's been a very popular figure on there. I mean, he's been kind of a firebrand. I think he has 80 million followers. He's taunted, some of the people who've pushed back hardest on free speech. But what's so telling is now he made a full-fledged offer, like to the tune of billions of dollars, to purchase Twitter outright. And I think the hysteria that we're seeing right now from the left in America is very telling. And it's not just America, by the way. Twitter is a worldwide thing, but if you look at who is lining up and the organizations, the other shareholders, for instance, Vanguard, BlackRock, you've heard of these perhaps? Yeah. The way that they are starting to circle the wagons, it's like, whoa, we can't let this important platform, somehow squeak through squeak out of our control and become a place where people can just say what they want. I mean, I haven't seen this kind of hysteria since election night 2016. That is saying something, because that was a night of an amazing meltdown that continued for the next 4 years and beyond. They still, Orange Man bad is still the driving force in a lot of people's lives. But I want to share with you, this is about a 1-minute clip from a couple of commentators on MSNBC. And I want you to just hear the fear, not just in their voices, but in their message about what happens if Elon Musk were to get a hold of Twitter and stop censoring people the way that Twitter has been censoring people. Listen to this hysteria.
There are real and devastating consequences for using that platform to lie. And we've seen it. We've seen it happen. I wonder, when talking about this, it's kind of funny. Elon Musk wants to buy it, but there are massive life and globe altering consequences for just letting people run wild on the thing.
Yes, 100%. But that's Facebook is really where the real action is in that. So this is a very small company. It has an outsized influence because media people like it, politicians, world leaders, and Elon Musk. And so one of the issues is if he's not going to do this, and by the way, Twitter and some of its biggest investors, like Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, are saying no, and they're putting poison pills in. What is he going to do? He's going to have to somehow unload this 10% stake. And that's probably what he's going to have to do, or raise private financing, which has its own risks and possible rewards, but a lot of risks for him.
Well, I didn't play the soundbite, but he was asked if there's a plan B, and he laughed and said there is. We'll find out what that is.
That's what a super villain hero would say, right? He thinks he's Tony Stark, right? That's what they'd say. However you feel about him, that's what Tony Stark would say.
Kara Swisher. It is
wow. Yes. Somehow this is very dangerous. People just running wild on the thing, saying what they think and not being subject to being censored. And oh, my word. Have you ever heard such hysteria in your life? And here's the kicker. This is the part that gets me. The voices you just heard? These are the liars. These are the people who lie for a living. This is the mainstream heritage media, which has lied and lied and lied to us ceaselessly. But they're very concerned that someone might use this platform to, to lie, to mislead people. I can only think that they're feeling like their job security is threatened or something like this. I don't know. It's astonishing. And I have to throw this out there, too, because it's possible. Maybe this is just a huge distraction. Is this supposed to keep us looking, at something shiny and something that everybody's talking about? It's certainly dominating the news cycle, so it's a little suspect in that regard, but it's undeniable. The liars are scared that they're going to have to compete with truth, or at least with something other than their lies is going to be made available more freely to people. Now, I don't know what Musk's options are. I mean, look, at this point, if he sells his shares, if he decides, Twitter, you're just not worth it, I think he could. I don't know what it would take, in terms of the startup costs, but he could afford to create his own alternative and probably bring, I would guess, the majority of his 80 million followers right over with him. But understand, this is not about, hey, Twitter, you do what I say or we're going to destroy. This is not some Bond supervillain. And the underlying issue here, what I'm asking you to consider is, why are those people in powerful places so concerned that information might be able to flow a little more freely and not be subject to algorithms and fact checkers and other people who want to make sure that only the official narrative can be taken seriously? I'm sorry, I'm not a Twitter expert, but I do find people on Twitter who have some very worthwhile things to say. And it's occurred to me that, the voices that have been most effective at speaking truth, or at least offering alternatives to that mainstream narrative that we're supposed to believe no matter what, these are the ones that are getting silenced. These are the ones who are seeing their accounts suspended or otherwise just terminated. I don't fear free speech. Even speech with which I disagree. Somebody wants to speak what they want to speak, I say let them. Doesn't mean I have to agree with them. And just like you don't have to agree with me. I mean, tens of billions of dollars right there on the table. And he's talking cash. Look, we'll put, I'll pay this much. Here's my offer. And the shareholders at Twitter are like, I don't know if we can do that. In free market capitalism, when somebody puts billions of dollars in free money in front of you and says, would you like this? Most people would say, heck yeah. Knowing full well they can, put that to good use. That's a resource now they can go and allocate as they see fit. But totalitarians, on the other hand, would be the ones to say, I don't want the money. Why? Because it's the control. I think that's the issue. They want control. And I'm sorry if this sounds kind of radical, but I'm feeling a bit animated just because the people who lie want to be the arbiters of the truth no matter what. And I know very well they can't handle the truth. They don't want us to handle the truth. Imagine the threat to freedom and democracy if people could just say what they think. Glenn Greenwald pointed out this is, without hyperbole, the overarching belief of Western liberal elites and many, if not most, of their followers. What a threat to freedom and democracy if somebody could say something that we don't approve of, or that we don't first filter to make sure that it's actually something you could be exposed to, or put some kind of qualifier on it. Well, now, our fact checkers have looked at this, and this is what they said. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be treated as a child, especially when it comes to the information that I access and the ability to make up my own mind on what it all means. And kids, once upon a time, there was a media or a press that we had that would actually report facts, free of judgment, free of loaded buzzwords and emotionalism. And the viewing public or the reading public was supposed to sit down and think about the information, the facts that they had been presented, and then make up their own minds. And that doesn't mean that people didn't try to steer or persuade in a different direction. But there was actually a thing called journalism, I know, and it had ethics, lines you did not cross, like inserting editorial into actual hard news stories. Those days are gone. So who's going to pick up that torch of truth and carry it forward? The answer is looking at you in the mirror.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
All right, welcome back to the show. You know, Dixie Chiropractic, that's Dr. Ward Wagner, is one of my sponsors. It would mean a lot to me if you are among my listeners in southern Utah, and especially if you are dealing with pain from car accident injuries, or maybe you have a bulging or herniated disc, or you're dealing with neuropathy. Please get a hold of Dr. Wagner. You can just go to their website. I've got a link in the show notes, dixiechiro.com. They've got a couple of introductory offers that I think would be well worth your time, but I want you to check this out for yourself. It means the world to me that I have these sponsors who support my efforts to get the truth out there. And if you or someone you know is dealing with pain, and again, this is particularly for my listeners in southern Utah, please check out dixiechiro.com. That's Dr. Ward Wagner, Dixie Chiropractic. So let's delve into Elon Musk's move on Twitter. Got an article here from Jeffrey Tucker from the Brownstone Institute. He says, as you have undoubtedly heard, Elon Musk, ever the rebel, has offered to buy the whole of Twitter for more than $43 billion. Now, he says that offer is final. No negotiation. If it's rejected, he will likely sell his 10% stake. Now, Jeff Tucker says, I'm personally excited about the prospect because so many of my friends have been canceled by the platform. I've seen the way this has affected their lives. Yes, they move on eventually, but the platform has become poorer in their absence. The range of opinion is more narrow, the links to vital research materials more and more thin. Plus, he says, many of us who remain are more careful than we should be. In other words, we're self-censoring. Elon's bid threatens this entire model, which is why right now shockwaves are shooting through many powerful quarters. Twitter's already packed with legacy users. Ooh, bad slip there. Legacy users clutching pearls and confessing how frightened they are. Now, Jeff Tucker says Twitter's probably the most powerful communication tool on the planet today, as instrumental in the election of Donald Trump as it was in driving the COVID narrative toward lockdowns and mandates. Its influence far outstrips its market capitalization. As Revolver News puts it, Twitter remains, by Elon's own admission, the de facto public town square. Despite its severe censorship, it is still the only major digital public space where anonymous accounts can interact with celebrities, journalists, and business titans, including Elon, where world leaders engage in spirited public diplomacy, and where dominant cultural and political narratives incubate and spread. Jeffrey Tucker says, therefore, this is not just about one company or one buyout. It's about the future of information control in the U.S. and the whole world. It's about whether the controls, takedowns, and censorships imposed over 2 years are going to be sustained, or, if we're going to trust the theory embedded in the First Amendment, truth stands the best hope of emerging when the right to speak is presumed to be an extension of human rights. Now, people will say, but it's private. And he says, let's be clear on terms. People have argued for a long time that Twitter, as a private company, is free to do what it wants. Granted. Further, it's argued that every single internet platform must have terms of use and hence curate content. That also is granted. Finally, he says it's up to the management of all such platforms to map out and enforce the range of what's considered permissible in the interest of its own users, and that is also true. Now, he says the practices we've seen emerge over several years at Twitter, and by extension also at Facebook, LinkedIn, Google, and many other companies owned and controlled by the top tech companies in the U.S., have gone far beyond these basics. Number one, the bans and takedowns have not been consistent with the terms of use. Often they seem entirely arbitrary, based not on what's actually threatening or misinformation, but on some judgment of what seems sayable or not sayable on that day or that hour. Even worse, the attacks have felt pointlessly punitive. Accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers have been blown away in a day for no reason. Now, that's clearly not good business, so why is it happening? Number two, these platforms have coordinated with each other, not perfectly, but in a way that's clearly discernible. If you get slammed by one venue, the risk of getting hit by others rises. Get your YouTube channel deleted and you start to feel the heat from Twitter and LinkedIn too. Same goes for Facebook. They're very clearly coordinating with each other. And as great and wonderful as the alternatives are, the network is not nearly as large or influential. Number three, government officials have been public about demanding these controls from these private companies. Biden denounced Facebook for permitting some COVID dissent, and his spokesperson has done the same. The Surgeon General's office in July 2021 put out a highly officious advisory demanding all sorts of practices from major platforms. This is so clearly a violation of the First Amendment that it seems crazy that the office is allowed to get away with it. So what did that Surgeon General advisory say? Well, here's what it said, quote, it demanded that all platforms, quote, make meaningful long-term investments to address misinformation, including product changes, redesign recommendation algorithms to avoid amplifying misinformation, build in frictions, such as suggestions and warnings, to reduce the sharing of misinformation, and make it easier for users to report misinformation. Give researchers access to useful data to properly analyze the spread and impact of misinformation. Researchers need data on what people see and hear, not just what they engage with, and what content is moderated, in other words, labeled, removed, downranked, including data on automated accounts that spread misinformation. Prioritize early detection of misinformation superspreaders and repeat offenders. Impose clear consequences for accounts that repeatedly violate platform policies. Amplify communications from trusted messengers and subject matter experts. For example, work with health and medical professionals to reach target audiences. Direct users to a broader range of credible sources, including community organizations. End quote. Now, with the advisory came a note from the Surgeon General. Limiting the spread of health misinformation is a moral and civic imperative that will require a whole-of-society effort. A whole-of-society effort? You know, that's exactly the same language deployed by the World Health Organization when, in February of 2020, it issued a document celebrating the way the Chinese Communist Party handled the coronavirus. But in this case, the virus is simply information the government hasn't approved. So in the United States, there are clear limits, legal limits, on the ability of governments to restrict free speech. How best for government officials to get around these limits and avoid court challenges? Well, the answer seems rather clear. Nudge private companies to do it for you. It's a way of getting around the Bill of Rights, and it's very clever. The framers of the U.S. Constitution believed that the strictures written in parchment would protect freedom, but after all these years, the administrative state has gradually come to discover this workaround. So now let's say you own one of the platforms out there that's distributing information to the public by virtue of soliciting content from users. You read this advisory from the Surgeon General. What force of law does it have? Well, it's unclear. Who voted on this? No one. Who's going to enforce it and how? Well, we really don't know. All we know is the most powerful institution in society has demanded that you run your business precisely as it says. So are you free to ignore these exhortations, and what happens to you if you do? Well, we don't know that either. Look at what happened to Parler. It was adding millions of users in late 2020 as Twitter censorship intensified. It was becoming a viable competitor. Then the attacks started, including detailed articles in major media. Apple removed the app from its store. Then the web host company Amazon responded and simply blasted the company into the ether, just like that. Now, eventually Parler regrouped, but it never recovered its previous momentum. Now, there are hundreds or thousands of cases, but one stands out to Jeffrey Tucker, and that is the cancellation of Russia Today, both the American version and the international one. There was so much programming on the American version in particular that was valuable. Many thousands of shows over many years, not Kremlin propaganda, but shows on philosophy, business, culture, and so much more. It was hugely valuable, and then in one day, it was all blasted away as a reflection of U.S. foreign policy priorities. Now, he says, just yesterday, I received an email from Google Ads that they will no longer accept any ads that seem not to take a pure U.S. line on the Russian-Ukraine war. Is this a private company parading for truth and against misinformation? Or is this a private company that has given over the management of its information architecture to government priorities and to match those priorities? See, wars are complicated, with many layers of facts and arguments. Pushing only one settled view of good guys and bad guys is perhaps the way governments like it, but it's inconsistent with everything we know about the history of nation-state relationships. He calls it what it is. It's a ministry of truth. The question is, can you see what's taking shape right under our noses? We'll come back to Jeffrey Tucker's article just the other side of these messages. You can check out the article in the show notes at thebryanhydeshow.com.
This is The Bryan Hyde Show. This is The Bryan Hyde Show.
Hey, welcome back to the show. Sewingandquiltingcenter.com is one of my sponsors. And again, my listeners in Southern Utah really have the benefit of having them right there in their community. It's a family-owned business located in St. George, Utah. It's been around since 1984. In that time, it's only changed hands 3 times. And the original owner still is very much a part of the day-to-day operations in that he's back there fixing machines, sewing machines, long-arm quilters, sergers, you name it. So if you have interest in sewing, and there are a lot of people who do, but even if you don't, you probably know someone who does, please direct them to sewingandquiltingcenter.com. Not only will they get the very best choice of machines at the very best prices, but you also get all the supplies that you need, the training to use those machines to their full advantage, and you also get service to back up, what you bought, to keep it repaired, keep it maintained. Even if you didn't buy your machine from Sewing and Quilting Center, they can still take care of you. I've got a link to their website in my show notes at thebryanhydeshow.com. Give it a click and consider adding a sewing machine to your list of self-reliance tools. May come a day you'll be very glad you did. So I'm sharing this article from Jeffrey Tucker from the Brownstone Institute about Elon Musk's big move on Twitter. And he points out here, the Ministry of Truth has effortlessly pivoted from one opinion on COVID to one opinion on Russia and Ukraine. You've seen this happen. We've talked about this on this program for years now, a couple of years. It will continue this toward whatever the next thing is, maybe something to do with inflation. In fact, if I can find it, I'll play the Putin price hike memo that went out, and you can hear the president and his spokespeople and politicians and news anchors all chanting, this phrase, hoping that it will stick. Now, Jeffrey Tucker says, here's the grave problem with the myriad people who are demanding a breakup of big tech. Who or what is going to break it up? He asks, why should anyone assume that government, the very institution that's been the major source of the problem, is the right tool for this? Any effort by government to break up big tech is certainly going to be captured by the very companies that government seeks to control. So Musk's capitalistic means here are not only more consistent with the American way, but also more workable in the end. Last week, Peter Thiel denounced the financial gerontocracy, rallying behind fiat currency and putting down cryptocurrency. He predicts that the young will overthrow the old in time. Now, we can make the same observation about corporate rulers today. Too many of them have signed up to become sock puppets for the state and a woke cultural social agenda. That's had a profound effect on American life, in fact, on life all over the world. Jeffrey Tucker concludes Elon Musk's exciting and dramatic move represents a bold attempt to overthrow the regime of control, propaganda, and enforced opinion, as manufactured by the administrative state. He says it could be a sign of things to come. The upheaval of our times will eventually touch every institution based on the widespread perception that something has gone very wrong and cries out for a fix. I like being able to turn to Jeffrey Tucker just because I think he has a very informed and principled take on this. And we're going to get into this some more in the other hour of the show. We'll talk more about this this move to create, to push back, I guess, against woke corporate America. And that's what you're seeing right now with Musk's move. Now, isn't it ironic that truth could be so hard to find during a time that's called the information age? Look at the information that's available right there in the palm of your hand. You can look up anything you need to look up right there on your smartphone. And yet darkness seems to be settling all around us. Have you noticed? Annie Holmquist has a marvelous essay on searching for truth in our media dark age. Listen to what she has to say here. The first dark ages are lost in the mists of antiquity with virtually no records. The coming dark ages will be equally lost in the blaze of studio lighting with a superabundance of records, almost all falsified. Now she says, hey, I haven't seen many articles from you guys in my Facebook feed lately, a friend told her the other day, wondering whether he had his settings wrong or something else was amiss. No, she replied, seeing that the record should be set straight. We just talked about Hunter Biden and his laptop before the subject was popular. And then she went on to explain how Facebook had given Intellectual Takeout its first week-long jail sentence in the fall of 2020, almost immediately after they posted an article daring to suggest that something smelled rotten from the laptop story. Apparent shadow banning followed shortly thereafter, preventing the many who wanted to receive our content from even seeing it. Annie Holmquist says, the Hunter Biden story is admittedly a sore spot for us. While it's great that our institution is now vindicated for posting such a story, it still feels rather unjust that we were published and maligned by those in mainstream and social media arenas for simply trying to present the facts in order to build public awareness. Even now, mainstream stories about the laptop, as well as the backhanded apologies that accompany them, seem crafted to justify their earlier coordinated efforts to conceal the truth. One can't help but wonder how many other stories in the mainstream media are concealed or falsely represented. The answer, according to the late British journalist Malcolm Muggeridge, is a lot. Writing in his autobiography, Chronicles of Wasted Time, Muggeridge recounted how a member of the old Comintern once described a meeting at which some stratagem was under discussion, and a delegate, a newcomer who had never attended before, made the extraordinary observation that if such and such a statement were to be put out, it wouldn't be true. The man went on to recount that those in the room laughed and laughed until tears ran down their cheeks and the Kremlin walls seemed to shake. Muggeridge then added that the same laughter echoes in every council chamber and cabinet room wherever two or more are gathered to exercise authority. That quest to conceal truth in order to grab power is also practiced by a number of media organizations. As Muggeridge notes further, quote, in the nearly 7 decades I've lived through, the world has overflowed with bloodshed and explosions whose dust has never had time to settle before others have erupted, all in purportedly just causes. The quest for justice continues and the weapons and the hatred pile up, but truth was an early casualty. The lies on behalf of which our wars have been fought and our peace treaties concluded. The lies of revolution and of counter-revolution, the lies of advertising, of news, of salesmanship, of politics, the lies of the priest in his pulpit, the professor at his podium, the journalist at the typewriter. The lies stuck like a fishbone in the throat of the microphone, the handheld lies of the prowling cameraman. End quote. Annie Holmquist says it is these lies that are presently hurtling our society toward another dark age. Muggeridge later noted in a series of lectures he gave, now published in Christ and the Media. He said, the first dark ages are lost in the mists of antiquity with virtually no records. The coming dark ages will be equally lost in the blaze of studio lighting with a superabundance of records, almost all falsified. And Annie Holmquist says the Hunter Biden story seems to have proved his point. The question is, how do we keep from getting caught up in all these lies that we are constantly fed? Now listen close. She's got some great answers here. Awareness is the first step. Knowing that the media and many public figures are likely spouting deceptive information should help us approach every news item or idea, even if it seems to come from a friendly source, with healthy skepticism. Such healthy skepticism grows out of an educated mind that doesn't simply rely on knowledge of present times, but looks to history and its figures to recognize repeated patterns and discern which ones to avoid. Finally, she says we need to have a close relationship with truth. Muggeridge explains that this relationship begins when we come out of the shadows of Plato's cave that the media has put us in and walk toward reality. Quote, Christ shows us reality, what life really is, what it is really about, and our true destiny in belonging to it. We escape from the cave, we emerge from the darkness, and instead of shadows, we have all around us the glory of God's creation. Instead of darkness, light. Instead of despair, hope instead of time and clocks ticking rather inexorably on eternity, which never began and never ends, and yet is sublimely now. End quote. In other words, Annie says, walk toward the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Now, I know for some people that, hey, this just kind of took an uncomfortable religious turn. But I'm going to echo what she's saying here. I believe that God is the ultimate source of truth. And I think the beauty of that observation is that the ultimate source of truth will not lie to you. Now, not everybody wants to access that source. I understand that. It can be daunting, even to admit that there might be an ultimate source of truth. I mean, that kind of puts some accountability on us, or at least it puts things in a different context of, hey, you know what, really there's nothing, so, eat, drink, be merry, do whatever you want. Life is short, party hardy, rock and roll, you ain't going to have much time. All I know is that when I have made truth a priority in my life, few things have made it easier for me to sort fact from fiction and truth from error than working on my relationship with my Creator. So, if you find yourself wondering, how do I dispel this gathering darkness? That's actually one of the first places that I would recommend. I would also echo Annie Holmquist's recommendation. Get acquainted with what happened before you arrived on this planet. Don't just learn about the historical facts and dates. Learn about the people. Learn about how they thought. Expose yourself to their minds and see what they observed. You'd be surprised what you can learn.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Hey, welcome back to the show. HSLAmmo.com is one of my sponsors. That's Spencer Worthington's company. Yep, you want to turn your money into skill at arms? Ammo is going to have to be a part of that. And if you're going to buy ammo, you might as well buy it from my friend Spencer at HSLAmmo.com. Now, I'm going to have Spencer on the show. Hopefully, I'm hoping this next week we can get a time set up to get him on the program. Spencer, in addition to being a great businessman, is someone who has walked the walk of learning how to live with frugality. And so I've asked him, hey, would you come on my show and talk about the joy of a life of frugality? And this may, for some people, it'd be like, Bryan, are you preaching against capitalism? Are you preaching against, the abundance of prosperous society? Not at all. But I'm also recognizing that things are tightening financially. I think for most people, even people with significant means, it's not as easy as it was. And I think frugality is one of those virtues that a lot of people are going to discover, some voluntarily, many, without having a choice in the matter. But Spencer's got a story to tell, and he's got some advice to give that I think would really benefit you. So mark that on your calendar that we'll have him on the show and talk a little bit about what he can share with us. All right, we've all heard the phrase, okay, boomer. And it's just more evidence. Yes, the generation gap is a constant. It's always going on. The older generations worry about these younger whippersnappers who need to get a haircut and straighten up and fly right, But Jon Miltimore says, okay, boomer may actually become the battle cry in the first salvo of a larger generational showdown. Now, specifically, he's talking about how baby boomers might have paid into Social Security, but millennials and Generation Z are being asked to pay a lot more for a program that will offer them less in return. Now, I've heard some people, I think it was Jim Quinn from the Burning Platform, say the debt that has been run up with the expectation that, well, following generations will pay that debt is the greatest example of intergenerational theft in the history of the planet. And I think we're about to find out if that's true or not. If it's true, we will see generational warfare taking place. Sorry, that sounds kind of dark, but, if you were to run up this massive debt and then just leave it for your descendants, your kids, your grandkids, their kids, does that strike you as a moral thing to do? I don't know. Something about that to me just does not seem honest, moral, or ethical. Jon Miltimore says, according to Smithsonian Magazine, an Assyrian clay tablet from 2800 BC bears a gloomy inscription describing how the Assyrian youth were ruining civilization. Supposedly, the tablet reads, "Our earth is degenerate in these days. There are signs that the world is speedily coming to an end. Bribery and corruption are common. Children no longer obey their parents." Now, the inscription's reminiscent of another that, according to Newsweek, was unearthed in the Sumerian city of Ur, located in modern-day Iraq and founded in 3800 BC, which says, "If the unheard-of actions of today's youth are allowed to continue, then we are doomed." Now, whether these tablets actually exist is unclear. Snopes, where are you when we need you? But he says what matters is that variations of these quotes have been circulating for at least a century, and there's a reason for that. Few will disagree that there's a tendency for generations to caricaturize one another. The young tend to see the old as fuddy-dudds and scolds, while the old tend to view the young as disrespectful, lazy, and rebellious. And nowhere is this more evident than in the current OK Boomer movement. Now, if you're not familiar, OK Boomer is an internet meme and catchphrase that went viral in 2019. It's used by Gen Z and millennials to mock baby boomers, grousing about their work ethic and attitudes. Now, to be fair, young people have something to grump about. And he says, I say this as a Gen Xer who has no skin in the game. They've been accused of being emotionally fragile, sexless, lazy ingrates who are going to die faster than everyone else. So there. But Miltimore says the extent to which any of these characterizations is true is open to debate, as is the extent to which baby boomers and Gen Xers actually believe these things. One could argue that much of the discontent is driven by weak social science and media who fan outrage to gin up clicks. What matters is that young people are getting a little tired of the caricatures evidenced by the commercial success, Dr. Freud, of OK Boomer merchandise. In turn, baby boomers appear to be irritated by the young upstarts who are clapping back. By the way, one of the greatest Christmas presents my kids ever gave me was 3 years ago. They gave me a nice black T-shirt that says, "Weird flex, but OK Boomer." And I wear it proudly to this day. Being a Gen Xer, I have the privilege of doing so. What matters is that those caricatures are creating divisions. And Jon Miltimore points to Myrna Blythe, Senior Vice President and Editorial Director at AARP, who told Axios, "Okay, millennials, but we're the people that actually have the money." Now, the internet exploded over Blythe's comment, of course, and the AARP quickly disavowed her words. And while the overreaction to Blythe's comment is much ado about nothing, he says it foreshadows a greater conflict ahead. So Jon Miltimore says the baby boomers might have the money, as Blythe puts it, but they're also leaning on millennials and Gen Z to collect more of their paychecks. About 44 million Americans received Social Security benefits in 2018, and roughly 34 million of those were baby boomers, who continue to retire at a clip of roughly 10,000 per day. Now, that's a lot of retirees to support. And before you begrudge boomers too much, consider a few things. First, boomers contributed lots of money to Social Security over the years themselves. Second, most of them are banking on that Social Security income, one of the proverbial 3 legs of the retirement stool, along with pensions, employer-sponsored accounts, and personal savings. Third, boomers haven't done a great job building out the other 2 legs. 45% say they have no retirement savings. So many of them really need those Social Security checks, even if they have less debt and more equity than any other generation. Nevertheless, Gen Z and millennials have some legit gripes. Baby boomers might have paid into Social Security, but millennials and Generation Z are being asked to pay a lot more for a program that will likely offer them less in return. In 1960, when the oldest boomers started paying Social Security, they paid 3% on income up to $4,800. That'd be roughly $41,000 in 2018 dollars. By 1970, they were paying 4.8% on the first $7,800, or $51,000 in 2018 dollars. By 1980, when the youngest boomers were hitting the workforce, they were paying 6.13% on the first $25,900 of income, roughly equivalent to $80,000 in 2018. Workers today, on the other hand, are you sitting down, are paying 6.2% on income up to $132,900. Now, that's a far greater contribution, if you can call it that, by a long shot. And the problem is, it's nowhere near enough. Next year, the New York Times reports, for the first time in nearly 40 years, Social Security will begin drawing down its assets to pay retirees their promised benefits. Without program changes, the trust will be depleted within 15 years. Then, something that's been unimaginable for decades would be required under current law. Benefit checks for retirees would be cut by about 20% across the board. Now, does anyone think retirees are just going to sit back and take a 20% shave on their retirement? No way. So what happens? Well, it's hard to say, says Jon Miltimore. But first we have to recognize this is not going to be an easy fix. The question is, who's going to budge? One of the problems with Social Security is that as the program has aged, fewer and fewer workers are supporting more and more retirees. In 1945, there were 42 workers per beneficiary. By 1960, there were just over 5 workers per beneficiary. And from 1970 through the 2000s, there were between 3 and 4 workers for every retiree. Today, 2.8 workers cover each retiree's benefits, according to the Social Security Administration. By 2030, there will be just 2.4 workers supporting each retiree. And in Europe, that worker-retiree ratio is even lower. So however you slice the data, it's clear that to sustain its growing population, Social Security will require much bigger contributions. Okay, column taxes, FICA, whatever. The point is the coming generations will be asked to pony up a lot more. How much? Well, the trustees of the Social Security program project the cash flow deficit over the next 80 years to reach a staggering $44.2 trillion. That's according to economist Veronique Derugi. That's trillion with a T. To put that figure into perspective, total federal revenues in 2019 amounted to $3.46 trillion. Now, Jon Miltimore says there are pathways to making Social Security solvent, of course. Most of them involve young people paying more in taxes and retiring later to fund Social Security for a generation that's 12 times wealthier than they are. So the irony of it all is almost too much. The lazy millennials and self-absorbed Gen Zers will soon be asked to cough up trillions to cover the retirements of the boomers who mercilessly mock them, all to fund a program that most millennials worry will not even exist by the time they reach retirement. One can't help but wonder if, when called upon to pay these obligations, millennials and Gen Z will just cock their heads and reply, "Okay, boomer." Wow. Yeah, we got a problem on our hands. Be interesting to see how this one shakes out.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.